From Nashville, Tennessee, Music City, USA, and the home of hot chicken, it's the Rick Altizer Show. Sit back, buckle up. Rick will talk with the movers, shakers, and creators who put Christ in Christian entertainment. He's a man who's clear so the world can hear. Here's Rick Altizer.
Hey, thank you so much for joining me today. I guess it's kind of the I Can Only Imagine month. We've had Andy Erwin on for the last two shows, and today we've got the producer of that movie, Kevin Downs. Kevin, thanks for being on the show today.
Hey, Rick, it's good to be here.
Yeah, now, Kevin, for those who might not know, Kevin is an actor, director, producer, and a writer. He has been doing this for quite a few years, about 20 years. He's been in the Christian movie making business. And Kevin, just really excited to have you on and talk about I Can Only Imagine.
Yeah, I Can Only Imagine is the latest film with my partners, John and Andy Erwin, the Erwin Brothers. And, of course, our last film was called Woodlawn, and before that was Mom's Night Out, a female comedy. And we're excited about I Can Only Imagine. It's the true life story of Bart Millard, the lead singer out of Mercy Me, and his iconic song, I Can Only Imagine, and how it came to be.
And I've seen the movie twice now. I saw it last year. I saw a rough cut last year, and just saw it a couple of weeks ago, kind of the finished version, and I just loved it. I highly recommend people going into the theaters and seeing that. It's in theaters now, and I wanted to talk with you. I had a lot of talk with Andy. We talked about directing, Dennis Quaid and different things like that. And that's been the last 2 weeks we've had Andy on. And, I wanted to talk with you about, as a producer, you produced the movie. Can we talk shop a little bit and talk to me? I know you had a couple of other people you produced with. What is the role of a producer? What does a producer do?
Yeah, so basically with the Erwin Brothers, my function is they're the dreamers. And like John Erwin likes to say, he creates the messes that I go and clean up. So, I basically I'm doing a lot of the nuts and bolts. They tell me what they want. We kind of get a formula together. And then once we know what we're going to do, then, we'll go out and we'll raise the financing. We'll get the distribution. We'll hire the cast and the crew, find the locations, and start to put the project together. And so that's kind of the role. The producer is the ringleader, if you want to call it that, or kind of like a building general contractor if you're building a house. Okay.
So the guy who's putting all the pieces together of the puzzle. So John and Andy create the puzzle, and you kind of put it together for them.
Right, that's right.
So what would be some of the, specifically for this movie, I Can Only Imagine, what were some of the specifics that you had to do there and some of the challenges you had?
Well, yeah, once we decided this was the film that we were going to do, obviously one of the first things is where are we going to shoot it? And so we had a couple of choices. And, of course, Bart Millard grew up in Greenville, Texas, which is northeast of Dallas, kind of close to the Oklahoma border. And so we wanted to have a landscape that really reflected the area that he grew up in. And so we explored, Oklahoma, Texas, maybe even western Louisiana. And at the end of the day, we decided that Oklahoma City and the outskirts of Oklahoma City would be the best place to shoot it. And so you do a lot of location scouting. You talk to local crews, and you start to put the pieces of the puzzle together and take pictures, and you start to imagine what this film is actually going to be like.
So, we see movies, and we don't think about all the work that's involved in every single shot. Let's take, for instance, in I Can Only Imagine, you have a theater that's packed with people, and there's Amy Grant doing a concert, and Bart there is in the theater. I won't give him more away, but what is involved in just putting, as a producer, what's involved in just, John tells you, here's what we want to do. We're going to have a theater. It's going to be filled with people. We're going to have Amy Grant singing a song. You've got an actress who does a great job portraying Amy Grant, and a band. And what's involved in all that, putting that together?
Well, yeah, a lot. You've got to obviously rent the facility out, and, assuming that you've got all your gear and your lights, your camera, your power, you rent the facility out. It's a part of the location schedule. So we're doing this for 3 months straight. Every day we might be in a different location. And so a lot of moving parts, moving pieces. But then the biggest thing is in that specific scene, we needed about 2,500 extras. And so we put the word out to local churches and kind of, spread it out there. But what we didn't plan on is there would be a massive ice storm the night that we shot that scene. And so we're like, as the weather, as we're watching the weather channel and getting some of the accurate reads on what the weather is going to be like, we got a little nervous. I will say that, but wouldn't you know it, 3,000 people showed up and made the trip down, and we packed out that auditorium, and it just looks absolutely beautiful.
That's amazing. And then you had to obviously find the auditorium. That was it supposed to be the Ryman, or was it something that you just needed just an auditorium?
Yeah, in the movie, we just kind of make it a nondescript tour stop for Amy, so we don't really specifically state it's the Ryman because it's not the Ryman. But we wanted something that really looked classy. I mean, and so Oklahoma City had this kind of historic, classy, and it's actually quite large theater that actually a lot of bands and performers play. I'm sure Amy Grant's played there before, and that really worked well for the film and for what we needed at that moment in time in the story.
And you'd have your crew there. You had to have lighting and sound and film and food, and so all that stuff. That's kind of what the producer puts together. Is that correct? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, I mean, you have your family and your team, and so there's an infrastructure that goes into that, and different departments, and there's department heads that will, be in control of their department, and then they'll report to me or my other producer, Daryl Lefebvre, who handles some of the department heads. And you're working together as a team to kind of, build this whole world, that these guys dream up. And I can only imagine you're taking a true story. So you're doing a lot of interviews when you're writing the script and making sure that you're crafting this thing in such a way that's really honorable to the true story that you're telling.
So did you start out as an actor? How did you get your start?
Yeah, I started out as an actor. I mean, when my last couple of years of high school, I majored in theater, my first 2 years of college, and really just fell in love with it, and moved down to Los Angeles. I've been born and raised in California, so moved down 3 hours south to Los Angeles and got plugged into a great church down there, and met a good friend of mine, David White, who later went on to found PureFlix. And him and I just did some early films together in our early 20s, some Christian movies, and kind of fell in love with it. And at that point, we were challenged, hey, why don't you guys go make movies and star in them? And so at the end of the day, we kind of we did it we learned by doing, if that makes any sense. And so nobody really taught us how to do it, but you got to kind of take your bumps and bruises and you figure it out along the way.
You are listening to the Rick Altizer Show on Bot Radio. My guest today is actor, producer, director, and writer Kevin Downs. And we're talking about the movie I Can Only Imagine. And, I've interviewed Andy Erwin, and you can also check out those earlier interviews if you missed them by going to my podcast, The Rick Altizer Show, everywhere podcasts are located. So, Kevin, I also noticed that you were in Courageous. You were one of the officers, Shane Fuller, in the movie Courageous. How did you hook up with the Kendrick brothers? I've had both of them on the show before as well.
Yeah, you know what? It's a small community of us that go out and make these films, and it was definitely small when I started doing this a number of years ago. And so, Alex kind of reached out to me. They'd seen some of my previous films and was kind of wondering, kind of poking around, seeing what I was doing, and I went through their whole kind of interview audition process, and at the end of the day, to be able to be cast in Courageous and go through that experience was certainly a once in a lifetime type experience. And I have a great friendship with those guys, and they're really just, not only are they talented storytellers and really good filmmakers, but they're true men of God and men of their word. And so, was blessed to be a part of Courageous, even though I had to play the bad cop, dirty cop, or whatever you want to call it. It was a lot of fun to play it and then just hang out and make that movie.
Excellent. And I noticed too in I Can Only Imagine you make many starring roles in a lot of these movies you produce. I know you were a coach in Woodlawn, and I Can Only Imagine you play a record executive, kind of a mean record executive who tells them they're not good enough. Is that kind of part of your roles, to play the bad guy in your movies that you produce?
No, I don't know if it's actually the goal of mine, but in the movies that I do with the Erwin Brothers, I don't have to be in the films, but I'm open to it. And so if Andy kind of sees something that he thinks that I might fit, him and I will have a discussion about it. And to be honest, I didn't really picture. I didn't picture this role to kind of turn out the way that it did, and I love it. It's actually one of my favorite scenes in the film. Mm-hmm. But hats off to them for really having a vision for what that scene needed to be, and I think it's a kind of a bit of a catalyst because in our journey to do what God has called us to do, we're gonna go through trial and some pitfalls, and the question is, what do we do when things look to be at their bleakest? Are we going to quit, or are we going to get up and pray that God gives us the strength to continue on? And
we've all been there. We've all had those moments in our life where there's been disappointment and discouragement, and following that voice of that God gives you, and also that sometimes that discouragement leads us to healing, which is what happened in this movie. The movie has such a great message of redemption, especially with Bart and his father. I talked about that with Andy, and just beautiful movie. I really would recommend everyone going and seeing it. I think it's a great film. You mentioned doing some work with David A.R. White, and I just saw God's Not Dead 3 last week, and David is the star in that. And so that's great that you have had kind of got in with him. He's been doing so many things, and PureFlix has been doing so well. So then, how did you transition? Then you're an actor. You're in with David A.R. White, making movies and acting. Then how did that transition into producing? Because that's a total different side of the fence.
Well, what happened? Him and I, back when we were like 22 years old, we were cast in a couple of Christian movies, and because all we were doing was acting. And then the director of one of those films said, you guys should go and make your own movie. You know how to do it. And we just needed that person to just say that we could do it. And not that it was going to be easy, because it wasn't. And so we wrote a film and produced a film that we put ourselves in the lead roles in. And it was kind of our educational experience in how to produce a film. And we realized, this is hard, but we can actually do this. And so, we started together. We ended up doing like 4 or 5 movies together. And then David went and started PureFlix, and I continued to produce the films that I've done. But then, during our sort of downtimes from some of the bigger films that we do, we like to do projects together because it's a lot of fun.
And then from there was directing and script writing. How were those just natural things? Just kind of happened. Were they natural happening?
I don't think it's natural at all. I mean, I've written a couple of scripts that we've done, and I've directed, I think, 2 or 3 projects. And mainly I did those so that I would understand those positions better as a producer. And so, I can talk to a director now and kind of understand what they're going through because I've done it. Same with the writing world. And so it just helps you to create patience and just have a little bit of understanding as you're going through producing a film, which is kind of the main thing that I do.
Well, let's talk about telling true stories. I know Andy was talking about how they like to tell true stories. Can we talk a little bit about that and about are you involved as a producer? Do you get involved in the story portion of it, or are you just nuts and bolts? How does that work as a producer?
Start to finish. I mean, the 3 of us, John, Andy, and myself, we'll get together and huddle and talk about the ideas that are really close to us that might be a good idea. So at the beginning of I Can Only Imagine, I had kind of caught wind of this story and went and presented it to these guys and just said, I think there's really a movie here. We should really explore it. And we talked about it a little bit. And then once we explored it and kind of got a lot more of the facts down of what the story was, it was like, okay, we got to go make this into a movie. And so that's kind of our process in the beginning. But, we worked together and the nice thing about having 3 of us is it takes 2 out of 3 to move ahead. So, there's no standoff or anything like that. And all 3 of us are kind of that mindset that, if we get overruled in a certain direction, then we're cool and we'll kind of go in the direction that the team wants us to go.
So did you communicate with Bart? Did you start that?
It was actually Andy. So what happened was Bart was at a screening of one of our earlier films. I believe it was Mom's Night Out. And Bart went up to Andy. He was there, and he said, that the quality of this film is just so incredible. Some producers are developing my story into a film, and I'd really love it if you would consider directing it. And what Bart didn't know is that we had been contacted, and we were actually exploring his story and seeing if it was going to be a movie that we wanted to make. So things were kind of moving in the right direction simultaneously.
You are listening to the Rick Altizer Show on Bot Radio, and my guest today is actor, producer, director, and writer Kevin Downs, and we're talking about the movie I Can Only Imagine. And let's get back to that's interesting that you're there kind of from the beginning, kind of deciding what movie we're going to do, how it's going to be written. Talk to me a little bit about true stories in Christian movies and why they're so important.
Yeah, I mean, all of us have different takes or opinions of the types of stories we want to tell. But for the Erwin Brothers and myself, the movies that we want to make are true stories that really paint an accurate picture of what the gospel is. And so we did that with Woodlawn, and we think we've done that here with I Can Only Imagine. Bart's story and the relationship that he has with his dad is just so precious, and it's something that a lot of us can relate to. We may have made mistakes in certain relationships in our life, and we're not deserving of a second chance, but yet God, through His glory and His grace, allows us to find redemption, and we understand that the work on the cross was certainly sufficient and enough. And it's beautiful to see that played out in personal relationships.
We've had a lot of experience working with Christian films, and you've been doing quite a few of them, and I'm sure you've made your mistakes and you've gotten better. But I really have felt like some of the movies we're seeing now, the bar is being raised. I kind of connect it with what the music industry was like in the 80s. All of a sudden these secular record companies started getting involved with the Christian record companies, and the budgets went up, and all of a sudden Christian music started sounding like the rest of the world's music. And a similar thing is happening with movies right now, is that the bar is being raised. And I thought The Case for Christ was well done. Woodlawn was so well made, and as well as I Can Only Imagine, the bar is kind of getting pushed up, and I love that. Can you talk a bit, as a producer and as you've been in the industry pretty much in all aspects of it, where you've seen it grow and where you see it, where you'd like to see it go as a believer?
Yeah, and a lot of that credit goes to the audiences. The audiences showing up and buying tickets in the theater. That's the thing. People need to know that this is a team effort, meaning don't wait for the movie to come out on DVD. If you've got a theater within 30 miles of you, make the effort to go out and see it while it's in theaters, because that's what actually allows us to continue to make films. That's just the way the dynamics work. And, Hollywood, the studios in Hollywood, they'll continue to provide an outlet or a platform for us to distribute and get these films out to you. But the way that happens is by people showing up and actually supporting while the movies are in theaters. And so we've been really blessed to be able to have that happen. Obviously, it creates a lot of awareness when that happens. And so when the Christian movies that kind of do a big number, you see them in a lot of mainstream media, it starts to pop up and do a lot of stories about them. And it helps kind of the overall purpose that we're trying to do, which is to try and get these films, these true life stories that accurately portray the gospel, make them into a movie and get them out there into the world so that the world can see what our culture is all about.
And you want to talk about the growth, kind of like how the Christian movie industry has been growing in the last 10 years?
Well, it's been growing a lot. I mean, when I started doing this, there was no industry. It was just kind of a couple of us that were making them straight to VHS or whatever the format was at that time. And now here you have major studios that are willing to sometimes finance, but also distribute these films and get them out to wide release distribution in theaters. And they go out all over the world in various formats and sizes. And to me, that's awesome. But the credit goes not just to the creators, but to the audiences for showing up and saying, you know what, this is product that I want to see.
And, I was so encouraged to see Academy Award-winning actor Jon Voight in Woodlawn, and you've got Dennis Quaid, who does a great job as Bart's father, and I Can Only Imagine. Are you involved in connecting with those actors and getting them involved in the project?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for Dennis Quaid, I was definitely involved in getting him to be a part of the show. And you never know if an actor is really going to resonate with the material that you have. And so we've been really blessed to have fine actors like Dennis Quaid and Jon Voight and Woodlawn and some of the others that we've been able to work with.
How do you go about doing that, getting a Dennis Quaid to be in your movie? How does that happen?
Well, a lot of it is just, you got to, you pray. I mean, number one, some of the doors that open are really unexplainable. And so people ask me, how'd you get Dennis Quaid? And, I can walk people through it, but at the end of the day, God gets the credit for it. And we're thankful that we will be able to have him in our cast.
Talk to me a little bit about why you're involved in the Christian movie industry, kind of like what your motivation and purpose is.
Yeah, my motivation is really to bring people to a closer relationship with God. I mean, at the end of the day, we're making entertainment that, you're paying your hard-earned dollars to go and see and take time out of your day. But we want to make sure that time is well spent. And so not only do we want to entertain you, but we want to refreshen you and just give you hope and joy and a better understanding of who God is and that God loves you so much and the reasons why that he loves you so much.
And I guess at the end of the day, it kind of makes you feel good what you're doing. There's so much junk coming out of Hollywood and making Christ-focused, Christ-based movies. What a blessing that must be at the end of the day to go lay your head down and go, I feel good about what I've done, especially when the movie is so focused on Christ, as so many of your films have been, which I just love that.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. I mean, when we put one of our films out there in theaters, it's actually displacing a film that might be a rated R film that is absolutely not the exact opposite of what it is that we're putting out there. So, and we're thrilled with that. And,
I do want to just reiterate what you were talking about. Christian movies are expensive. They're expensive to make. And we talked about this. I've talked about this so many times on the show. If you want to have Christian movies, you've got to buy tickets. You can't wait for somebody for it to come on Netflix or whatever. You've got to buy tickets. You've got to, because it's not like making, even in a record back in the day, maybe $60,000, $100,000, which was so overwhelming for the Christian industry. And then the secular industry came in and put that money in. But we're not talking that kind of money. It's so expensive just to get your movie in the theaters. It's like $1,000 just to have your movie show in a theater, and you haven't made it or marketed it. And the marketing dollars are about as much or more than the production dollars. So it's so expensive, millions of dollars, and that's why it's important. If you want to have Christian movies, you need to buy a ticket, and I encourage you to. It's in theaters now. I Can Only Imagine. Kevin, kind of your last word here. We got about a minute left on the show. Just kind of your last word on the movie I Can Only Imagine.
Yeah, I Can Only Imagine is the true story of Bart Millard, the lead singer of Mercy Me. Of course, it's a song that so many know and have known for so long, and now you get to hear the true life story behind the creation of the song and Bart's relationship with his dad. And it comes out in theaters March 16th across the nation. And you want to check it out. It stars Dennis Quaid and Trace Adkins and some really a wonderful cast. Priscilla Shire, who was the lead in War Room, is in it. And we have a great cast, and it's a really great movie. It'll lift you up. It'll give you a rush of hope, and you'll have a better understanding of where I Can Only Imagine came from.
And Cloris Leachman. You gotta love that. I love it. So, well, Kevin, thanks so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it. It was very informative, and, God bless you, and I pray a continued blessing in what you do in the Christian movie industry. Thanks for doing what you're doing.
All right. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
God bless. Bye.
Bye-bye.
If there's a show you've missed, you can go to my website, rickaltizer.com, and catch up. Or you can listen to my podcast in iTunes or wherever you hear your podcasts. Just search for The Rick Altizer Show. Altizer is spelled Altizer. I want to thank you for listening. Hey, would you tell a friend about this show and share the love? Be sure to check us out again next week as we discuss how we communicate the gospel through media to our culture. Let's be clear so the world can hear. I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.